Cool. So, let's get started. Firstly, I'm super excited about the final platform update of the year here at Curiosity. We've got some really interesting use cases to show off today. And so without further ado, I'd like to, introduce two of my colleagues and speakers. George Blundell is here. He's Curiosity's product manager, and he's joined by Ben Riley, Chief Product Officer at Curiosity. In this session, they will, discuss the latest trends, use cases, and feature releases, along with Curiosity's future vision and ongoing development projects. So thank you all for joining today and presenting. And I'd love to pass on to Ben.
All right, thank you very much. Fantastic. I'm going to steal the screen from you, if that's okay. It's interesting. George and I were together yesterday, and we were talking about some of the exciting stuff that we've got planned. I'd say for next year, but actually even over the next couple of weeks. But it's important maybe just to understand some of the context as to our thinking and ultimately where we're trying to kind of, go as an organization, especially when it comes to the problems that we see across, software and enterprise companies trying to sort of solve data-related problems. A lot of the problems we see are typically symptoms, right? They are masking where the real sort of root cause comes from. We see sort of a ton around compliance, a ton around coverage, and some of these terms you may sort of come across in your sort of day-to-day: slow testing, silos, technical debt, vagueness, firefighting, so on and so forth. And our goal really is to try and sort of root out where these symptoms come from and get to sort of the real cause and hopefully some solutions therefore. And for us, you may be sort of familiar with some of these pieces, but it's around the sort of, the inner and the outer loop and a lot of the misalignment between the two of them. So I won't spend too long running through this, but it is important to understand that, the world of the inner loop, the developer productivity world, if you were to try and narrow that down a little bit, it's been like massively invested in over the last 20, 30 years. Every company is a software company, all of those sorts of things. But the supporting elements that sort of sit alongside that typically don't get as much love, don't get as much thought, are sort of seen quite often as, we'll fix those things later. But actually, if you can put time and effort into the supporting features of the outer loop, you'll get much more when it comes to that entire process and your ability to get more out of your sort of developer productivity, the value that they deliver, and then ultimately the sort of, hopefully, the world-class sort of software experience that you're trying to push out to your customers. We're going to talk through some of the updates that we're putting into the Curiosity platform. I think it's really important to understand some of that in terms of why we do these things, but looking at elements around, how do you, get data in front of people in a way that is easy to consume, and you make it easy for them to find the things that they need. How do you do this so that it supports some of those critical assets, that, the ideas and the ideation of, we really want to improve our experiences for our customers. How do we support that with the right data? And then ultimately get to a position where the value that you're providing is not a series of symptoms that you're trying to fix, but it's just genuine value, right? That you are providing, from cost savings to bug detection to less headaches, right, to less stress. But data is now in a controlled space that you're able to sort of prove the quality that you're putting into the system and really support that sort of process. So I think it's just in a super fast way. That was probably a little bit too fast. It's just important to understand what we're doing, why we're doing it, and why it's important. As we look at some of the features that we're sort of putting out, and we're going to go through a bit of a demo and show some of these things off, I just wanted to highlight a couple of pieces. The first is around our composer. So you'll notice in the UI there is now a composer feature. Ultimately, one of the things that people are trying to do is get their hands on data very quickly. Sometimes they have the skills to be able to do that, write scripts, write SQL, so on and so forth. Sometimes they don't have that capability. Sometimes they don't have that tooling to be able to do so. So we can now do it across, essentially databases and across APIs. So I'm going to just walk through how that works, and as part of the next release, you'll be able to kind of get into that and have a bit of a rummage around. There's more to come in this space. We've already applied some AI, so I'll show some of the AI pieces, which is going to be really important. When you're going to be using it, essentially, I think through investigation primarily. You want to find a piece of data, you want to look for something, you've been you've got given access to a particular API, you've got access to a particular database. How do I find the stuff that my teams or myself need, right? How do I find the customers and the accounts and the transactions and all of those different examples? And it just allows you to start to build up this repository. What we've also tried to do is simplify down how you can then expose that out to potentially non-technical users. If you get people who aren't allowed, can't get, don't know how to access the data from the backend database, you can apply that in a very straightforward way. It's the use of parameterized sort of forms to be able to do that. It's really useful. It's very fast at being able to get people in a controlled manner to be able to interact with the database. And it is very much a sort of, for us, it's a first step in this particular process. But there's more that we're going to be sort of focusing on. So I will share my screen and then we will actually show it off a little bit. Kikoki. So I'll ask one of the guys to ping me if you can't see my screen right now. So inside the platform, Composer is on the left-hand side ribbon now. As part of the drop-down, you've got the Query Composer, which is for interacting essentially with underlying databases that you kind of connect to, or the API Composer for going and working with APIs. In here, I've got sort of a connection drop-down list for all the connections that I've got access to. I've got some Oracles and Postgres, so on and so forth. And as you would sort of, I think, typically expect, your ability to come in, execute query commands where you have relevant data, potentially where hopefully some data exists in one of my schemas here we can have a bit of play around with. We've tried to make it as, I guess, straightforward to use as possible. Just write your own queries in there. There are certain things that you can sort of do. If there are existing relationships, and I'll show off a little bit later, where, for example, some primary keys, some foreign keys might exist. I might have some in this credit card table. Maybe I don't. Maybe I don't have any data in this credit card table. Let's try one more time. You can also do tree walks, so you can walk up and down. So, for example, here I have got some data. I've got my customer ID. They get highlighted with particular colors, so I can go look at that particular customer, or I can go and look at a particular account, and delve into that particular record to understand what's going on. So it's a nice way of being able to tree walk between systems or between queries without really having to do much. So I can, in this case, I'm jumping between my tables to kind of go and look at that. I could also just ask AI to build me something. So I need customers' names with maybe a balance over 1,000, something along those lines. And what our AI will do is it will look up and down the schema that we're sort of working with, and it's going to essentially compose me a query. Might take a couple of minutes, so I have, in good TV style, gone and created one, or used one that I've created earlier. The interesting thing about this is actually we can now start to parameterize this query. What that means is, as part of a parameter, I could give people the ability to, at runtime, change that parameter. So at the moment it's set to 1,000, right? So I'm looking for people with a balance over 1,000. There may be other things, that I'm interested in. So I might be interested in, I don't know, in fact, let's steal this guy. I might be interested in the account type, for example. I might be interested, as we are, in the balance. It very much depends, right? Depends on what your use case is and what your query is. So let's just run this, and what it will do is it'll allow me just to edit those particular features. So let's say we're looking for somebody with a balance of 1,000 and an account type of a savings account or a checkings account, and so on and so forth. So that used to be reasonably tricky actually to do, so we sort of simplified that particular motion. The next piece we do is we actually add that into a pipeline. Now George is going to talk about pipelines in a minute in a bit more detail, but by creating a pipeline, and this is going to be called sort of, our account pipeline, something along those lines, we'll default some values in here, so 1,000, and we'll stick with our savings account. it's starting to turn that into a repeatable job. And then as part of that repeatable job, we can apply a form on top of it. So the reason we put a form on top of it is so that I can then expose that to a team, essentially. So if you've got a team that's coming to you and asking for data, you can put one of these forms in front of them that sort of says, I want to find accounts, I want to find credit cards that I can use as part of my testing. They need to have certain parameters to them. They need to have certain values to them. And without actually having to know, obviously, any of that back-end database structure, you can just give them a form. That form can be embedded as part of an iframe. It can be embedded just as an API. So that actually you're now simplifying that sort of method of being able to go and request data. So as we can see down here, our little job engine has finished. That's also been modified recently, right? So you can now watch the jobs kind of kick off from within screen. But a user, an end user, so say I am Mantas, and Mantas is after some data, they would just simply come in and ask for the things that they want. In this case, a balance and savings. Again, that could be embedded into a Confluence page or somewhere else. They'd edit their balances up, and it's just going to go and find the data for them, right? So, and we can modify that. You can obviously customize that SQL as much as you like to be able to search for different things, but it's a nice way of being able to start to interact with data. The other piece that we'll have a look at is our API composer. So there's a few bits in here. Firstly, there is also AI embedded in here. So if you don't have an API, you can just ask it to go and find you one, right, that you want to go and play around with, and that's fine. But, typically, people will have a particular API they want to play and do some stuff with. In this case, we're just using the SpaceX one. And I can just interact with this as you might expect. So I've got my request headers, my body, my so on and so forth. And then you can start to apply assertions. So by default, if I remove some of these assertions, you can just come in and add the ones that you're interested in. So, we could just add in particular status code that we're looking for. The auto build is just going to suggest some based on the details that we know. And then as you run anything against this particular API, those assertions are going to run. So status code 200, if I change that, so it goes to a 201, for example, it's going to just pick out some of those details. So if you're after a particular, investigation, you're trying to work some of these bits out to start with, it's a really nice start. You can then apply that into a pipeline as well. So I'm going to let George talk about the pipelines as I think there's a body of context there, but it's a really nice wrapper at being able to start interacting with some of these elements. So I'll pause there. George, I'll hand it over to you, and then if there's any questions, feel free to put them in the chat and I'll answer them as we go through.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Ben. So let me share my screen as well.
All right, all good.
Okay, so you should see slide deck. Let me know if you can't. But yeah, so data pipelines. So what are they? So essentially,
I can't see your slides at the moment, mate, I'm afraid. Just make sure you share the whole screen. Sometimes
the wrong one.
Yeah, all good.
Entire screen.
Yeah, there you go.
Is that better? Boom. Technology. Yeah. Alrighty. So yeah, so data pipeline. So essentially what this allows us to now do is chain together quite complex individual data processes into larger repeatable workflows that can be exposed into kind of easy to use forms, like how you would normally be interacting with some of our activities. Now, I guess the reason why we built this is actually a lot of the data preparation steps, so masking, scanning, subsetting, generation, they never will exist really in isolation. They usually form one step in a wider kind of process where you might be trying to prepare some data to put in a QA database, or find some data or make it if that data doesn't exist. The pipelines are a powerful canvas that will allow us to formulate those processes and tie each of those linked activities together and put some kind of conditional outcomes and conditional logic around it. So I'm going to show you a couple of different use cases, particularly use cases that we've actually already deployed at some of our kind of early adopting customers for data pipelines. So we're now kind of fully releasing data pipelines in the December release, so it'll be out there and available for people to use. So if there's anything that you see on this webinar today that you're particularly interested in, just talk to kind of your Curiosity representative, and we'll be able to kind of help you get moving with that. So I mentioned kind of it can be basically a blank canvas to string together lots of different individual activities or steps, right? So what the first example that we'll look at is essentially find and make. Now, what this will do is we're first going to set up a find job. So if any of you here have kind of the find and reserve utility licensed, that's what that first step is. And then basically we're adding a piece of conditional logic beyond that says, okay, if I don't find this data, then I want to generate or trigger a process to generate some data based off of some parameters I can set. Now, what that does is it means that, okay, well, instead of just looking for data and not finding it, I can automatically trigger a process to put the data in that is missing and kind of get you moving, like if you're looking for data for your tests, for example. So what does that actually look like in our world? So basically, we'll have this kind of new model type that is actually around kind of based on an RPA process. But basically what we're doing here is, first of all, linking together our two activities. So we have a small kind of icon here that basically has that find job embedded. What this is doing is first we're going to look at the find. If we don't find any data, then that's fine. We don't need to go in and generate any data to fill those missing gaps. But if we don't find the data, let's go and actually trigger a generation process that can go and plug the gaps. So when I come in and hit the run button here, essentially what we've got are the forms and the parameters associated with each of those steps. So the first one is our find. So I can come in here. I won't do this now, but I'll show you a result from earlier. I can go in and set the type of data that I'm looking for my test. So different credit limits, order counts, contacts, etc., etc. And then I can say, well, okay, if that data is missing, go in and actually create me some more data based off of these parameters. So I can come in and say, I want different 100 different customers with these different statuses and set up different ranges to generate, right? Now, when I run that, you'll see that basically these run on the right-hand side. So each step here will have the associated logs for each of the activities. So the first thing that we're doing here is actually going, okay, well, I've tried to run a find. It's actually found that it can't find any data. So that's what this not found true is set to. Then we've triggered our generation process. In this instance, I have literally just created one record that I know I needed. And then you see after that, it goes down and says, well, now I haven't rerun the find. We've found data this time, so that ends the process. Now, advantage here is that now instead of running first the find and then going away and having to run the generate separately, it all runs together now in a reusable process, right? This then exists as a model that anybody can run. You can expose this as a form and embed it in wherever you need to run it through an API or all of the usual things that you would normally be able to do with our kind of form-based execution. Taking a step back, if we actually look at the activity, you'll see we have basically this new type here called pipeline. This pipeline has essentially those two different activities that I'm talking about. So the first one here is the find. and the second one here is the generate, and then we actually have the server processes associated with these. So I mentioned, like, we can come in and run it from that pipeline model, or we can just run it from the job submission forms as well. So as I kind of mentioned before, this is one of the use cases that we deployed at one of our kind of early stage customers. One of the first, actually, I think it was the first use of pipelines. So now they're able to tie together their finds and their makes into something a little bit more kind of cohesive. The second one to talk about here is kind of a more wide-ranging pipeline, where we've actually strung together several different processes into kind of one wider workflow, which would typically be used to prepare an environment for QA or for test, right? So first step here, run database validation, ensure that there's no violations in the databases, there's no compilation errors. Then we're going to take a subset. So we only really care about, say, 5 or 6 of the tables within the database. So we're going to subset those. We're then going to mask that data. So imagine you're taking a subset from production. You want to mask that before it leaves that secure environment or is passed on to QA. Then the key point here is well, actually, we're not always just happy with masking the data. Often production databases don't have the requisite level of data coverage that you'd want for kind of rigorous and complete testing. So upon that kind of masked and subsetted database, we want to actually generate some additional records, boost that coverage level, give our testers, our developers more data to play with in that environment. And then after all that, we'll revalidate the database just to make sure we didn't break anything along the way. So again, hopping out to the example. So this one's a little bit bigger than the last, but basically, again, you see this kind of workflow workflow setup, right? Where first we're validating. Essentially, we have a little condition here that says, okay, if that process failed, then we just end and say, something went wrong, there was an error. If it's passed, then we can kind of continue. So then the next step is to look at the tables that we want to subset. So we can actually get a pretty nice view here of those tables. You'll see that there's lots of different relationships, lots of different foreign keys that we need to consider as part of this process, right? After that subset, we do a little bit of kind of database maintenance, really, where we reset the sequences. Then we go in and basically mask those tables that we care about. So again, you see that list there of the tables that we're masking. And then we actually then want to generate into, I think in this instance, we're just generating into 3 different tables: order items, orders, and customers, and then doing a validation that we didn't break anything along the way. Again, I won't run this live as it takes a few minutes, but basically you have all of those forms associated with each step. So your subsetting, where you can define the different actions, whether you want to add or drop foreign keys, subset, truncate the database. Masking, where you can define a couple of different options here, how many batches, for example. And then your generation process, kind of similar to the last example, where okay, I can decide as part of it, I want to generate 1,000 extra customers using the different parameters and set up kind of different combinations of data to generate for it. Again, then I go to the right-hand side, and you can sort of see the steps involved here, where first we validate, subset, reset sequences, do the mask, and then do the generation. In this instance, we created 100 records into our database. And actually, at this point would be a good point to flip over to Ben's query composer, where you can see, okay, well, I actually want to take a sneak peek into that database and view those 100 records that I created, right? So that's what kind of a nice other use case for the query composer. So overall, we're pretty excited about this. I've kind of highlighted those two use cases as kind of the first ones we've done, or the first ones that are really being used by our customers. However, the beauty with pipelines is that there are lots of different options here. We could tie together basically anything you want to do in the Curiosity platform together into a cohesive, reusable data pipelines workflow. Cool. Okay. So I'll stop sharing my screen. Probably hand back to Mattis.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, I got it from here. So cool. Thank you for that. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, George. So it's really, really good presentations. I'm really excited about the work we've done on pipelines and the impact they can have at your organization and the way you manage your test data. So we've got a few minutes left. So I would just like to get a little comment here from Ben and George. So we did have a poll that we ran at the start. 30 seconds, George, what do you think? So the poll is, how often do you encounter delays in your release cycles due to issues in data preparation, environment setup, requirements, and testing? From your experience talking to customers, what do you find? Do these things actually cause problems? Is this something that happens often?
Yeah, I think sometimes it can happen so often that it's just completely normalized, and people will just expect that preparing data for a project is going to take 3, 4, 5 months, when there are solutions out there, including pipelines, the things I was showing today, that make those data preparation steps much faster. But often people don't know. And from what I've seen, right, every software project has delays. Every software project, not every, but most software projects go over budget and over time, right? So you've got to find ways to cut down that time. I don't know, Ben, anything to add on there?
No, I just agree. Yeah, see it all the time. Quite often in I think assumptions for how easy people expect it to be, but often, yeah, there's a lot of bottlenecks and a lot of trouble when it comes to getting data in the right place at the right time. So yeah.
Awesome, perfect. Yeah, it's really good answer there, George, and yeah, thank you, Ben. So yeah, we are running short on time, so I will just like to call out a couple of things. One is that we'd love to have you, everyone here who's attended today, to take part in Curiosity's survey. So this survey is really short. It'll take you 5 minutes to do. It should be up on your screen now to take part. But this will help us understand how your industry is tackling in and out of loop challenges, the test data challenges you might be facing, and that will help us, of course, to then make our product better, make our platform better, and really target those pain points that the industry is experiencing. So yeah, please take if you have 5 minutes, please do fill in the survey. They really help us and hopefully help the community learn more about the challenges we're facing. Cool. So I think that's all the updates we have for today. And yeah, I'd just like to thank everyone for joining. I hope you enjoyed this, quick, short and sweet update that we had today. And yeah, so if you'd like to carry on the conversation, please, please don't be shy. Do email us. Do get in touch with George and Ben on LinkedIn, or email them directly. We'd love to have your questions, any feedback that you have. We'll be keen to listen and to answer. If you have any colleagues who might be interested in our platform updates, then please share the recording and future updates with them. And finally, please follow Curiosity on LinkedIn or visit our website to stay up to date with our updates. And cool. So yeah, I think that's it. I thank you everyone for joining, and thank you for Ben and George for presenting today.
Thanks a lot.
Patrick. Thanks everybody.